Wakey, wakey. Thursday, the 6th of June, 2024. You bang on time for Sokoni here on Morning Prime. Today is Sokoni Day, where we take an analysis of the state of the economy. How is it faring? And the biggest issue right now in the country is all about the finance bill. We'll have a bellyful of that, of course, until now. It has gone to the floor of the House, but the debate continues apace. Right now that we have the public participation on it, make sure you weigh in on that as well. We'll be looking at a raft of issues as far as also the ghost workers are concerned. We have plans from the government to make sure that is tamed, and we are busting the ghost there. So that will come much later, also the course of the program. We'll be looking on also what is happening with the counties that they're defying the orders from the COB or the advisory there regarding how they should be conducting or opening the banks. We have over 1,600 commercial banks that they are now depositing their money in. This is in defiance to what the law says, that central bank should be the main banker for the counties. Also, this morning, we shall tell you also what is the latest on the Purchasing Manager Index that is giving a very positive outlook of how the economy has been performing since the start of this year up to now. Things are looking bullish, especially now with the shilling gaining strength against the dollar and also the fuel prices going down. We'll be joined this morning. Already we have this morning with us Engineer Patrick Obath, who's the chair of KIPSA Foundation. Also, we'll be joined much later by Professor Dominic Mwenja, who is the chair of Central Bank Pension Fund. We'll be joined by Professor Gituro Wanaina, who is, of course, a professor at the University of Nairobi School of Business, and also Dr. Jim McPhee, who is lecturer at Strathmore Business School, and that is Business School Accountancy. So we have a full-packed show, but let's see how the weather will be. They always say, whatever the weather, we will weather the weather. Whether the weather be hot, whether the weather be cold, we will weather the weather, which is up next. right, let's see what is fresh off the press today. This is what you're waking up to. On the front page of the Standard, Ruto takes over Raila's AU job bid. Insert campaign hub. President William Ruto and Raila Odinga are leaving nothing to chance in the quest for Africa Union Commission chairmanship, with government taking charge even as opposition chief discloses they have agreed to cut bureaucracy and unveil a well-oiled joint drive. We have a quote here from Musalia Mudavadi, the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Foreign Affairs CS, saying, quote-unquote, the campaigns are led by the state with highly experienced and knowledgeable officers, with the State Department for Foreign Affairs having established a campaign secretariat which includes the candidate's strategy team. And also still on the front page of the Standard, why state wants court to give nod to GMOs. President Ruto determined to push for adoption of genetically modified organisms, asks the court to throw out 4 petitions and adopt a decision that approved BT maize. That story is tucked away on page 8 of the Standard today. And also looking at the teaser on top here, World Bank now falls Treasury tax plan and targets. You can follow this story on page 7 of the Standard, where they're decrying the current, of course, financial bill the way it looks. Sounds a bit punitive to them, but we'll give you all the details much later in the course of the program. State's new push to curb counterfeits, that is on page 18, and how Modi's party lost majority. Looks like it's the same script in India as is in South Africa, and more doping sanction on the way. That is on the sports pages of the Standard today. Kibaki friend's son knew of other daughter. Right, there's a story here you need to follow regarding a daughter who claims to be, or a lady who claims to be the daughter of Mwai Kibaki. This is Standard today. Also, remember you have the real estate coming in handy for you. Get all the wiser as far as matters real estate is concerned. Raila, I'm not anyone's project. This is what is the splash of the front page of the Daily Nation this morning. The flag reads contest, state support surprised me, says ODM chief. AUC bid, it is now all system go. After the government yesterday officially unveiled the roadmap for former Prime Minister Raila Odinga's and Kenya's candidacy in the forthcoming election of the next chairperson of the African Union Commission. At a joint press briefing with PSC, Musalia Mudavadi, the opposition leader, said he was ready for the continental task ahead. You have a story on page 4 and 5 of the publication today. Also, Odinga to face off with 3 others. Only candidate from the East African will be eligible for the AUC chairperson's position as part of new rules on rotation. After rigorous voting, they will then debate each other at a televised forum where they will field questions from the public. Mr. Odinga is facing former Seychelles Vice President Vincent Meriton, Djibouti's Minister of Foreign Affairs Mahmoud Yusuf, and ex-Somalia Foreign Minister Fawzia Yusuf in the selection set for February next year. All right, Kenya is all set to host 2024 Kiswahili Day. Preparations in top gear, says Juma. And you can read the story on page 2 of the publication today. And children's doctor by day and DJ by night. Talk about Dr. Elizabeth Kuta. You can find a story and how she managed to, of course, juggle all these frogs. That is inside the publication today. We have a star up next. Inside Public University's cash distress is a splash this morning. In the red, debts have overrun assets by about 43 billion shillings. They hadn't paid suppliers for goods and services totaling 13 billion shillings. That story is on page 4 and 5 of the Star today. And pain of reclaiming rivers land. Right, the demolitions are ongoing, and you can see down the drain a building along Dar es Salaam Road in industrial area in Nairobi was demolished by government on Monday, even after the owners secured a court order against the demolition. That story also is inside the Star. And why Kenyan men decide against cuts. A growing number of men aged between 25 and 39 may have decided against circumcision, and no amount of persuasion appears to change their stance, a new study suggests. While they gave researchers the main reason for not taking up the cut which is highly beneficial in preventing HIV. The men kept changing goalposts once their concerns were addressed. You have a story on page 2 of the publication today. Moi University land list irregularly. Also the story on page 8 of The Star. And lawmaker slash DP Rigathi Gachagua budget by 500 million shillings. You can follow this story on page 6 of the publication today. Raila's dream team is a splash on the front page of the business of the People Daily, I should say. Eyes on the prize. Former Prime Minister assembles galaxy of retired diplomats and scholars to work alongside foreign ministry officials in campaign for African Union post ahead of February elections. You have a story on page 4. Mudavadi says, quote unquote, we have a visionary leader to fire up the African Union to greater levels. Raila is a Pan-Africanist who naturally espouses the quote unquote think Africa above all guiding principle of the AU Commission. And the job hunters also are here who they might be in this committee. We have Mahbub Malim, Elkana Odembo, also Dr. Caroline Karugu and Makao Mutua. Those are some of the faces that will be in this particular committee that will be strategizing on how we can, as a country, back this particular seat. How Kenyans were fed on poisonous sugar. This is a story you want to follow on page 6 of the People Daily today. A relief as children vaccines arrive in the country. Siku sukumwa AUC. This is what Taifa Leo is saying today. Kiongozi wa Azimio asema alishtuka serikali ilipounga mkono azma yake kuwania wenyekiti wa baraza la AU. Kinara wa ADM Raila Odinga amesema azma yake ya kuwania wenyekiti wa tume ya muungano wa Afrika AUC si mradi wa serikali ya Kenya. Muturi atetea zao la mogoka. Mwanasheria mkuu asema biashara hiyo inategemewa na idadi kubwa ya wananchi. You have a story on page 2 of Taifa Leo. NC tayari kwa nusu mkate. This is NC of South Africa. This is Taifa Leo. Kenya sasa kutenga siku ya Kiswahili. Waziri Jumwa asema shughuli nyingi za kitaifa zitaendeshwa kwa Kiswahili. Alright, you can follow the story inside the Taifa Leo today. And Dibrien Warubuni kusaka donge. You have a story on page 20 of the publication today. We buckle out to some business. Today is Sokoni. And this is where we center our focus as well. Parastatal reform split PSC and State House teams. PSC term new state corporations guidelines illegal. Sleep prevails, fight to control billions and the parastatals. The Public Service Commission has told off the Executive Office of the President over new guidelines on the management of parastatals, pointing to a simmering struggle over the control of the state-owned entities that manage billions of shillings. PSC Chairperson Anthony Mushiri has stamped Executive Order number 3 of 2024 on guidelines for the management of state corporations as illegal and unconstitutional for excluding the Commission from their formulation. The rest of the details tucked away here inside the Business Daily on page 2. And it is emerging now rural folks are getting richer faster than city residents. Kenyans living in rural areas are getting richer faster than millions of their counterparts who have migrated to cities in a trend that is redefining wealth creation in the country. You can read the rest of the details there on page 2 where there is that particular graphic presentation that gives you an indication of what is really happening, especially with the devolved government. It seems to have spurred this particular growth. And now you might think about moving to urban centers, right, to actually for greener pastures. Things are thriving and sprouting and growing within counties. Uber Bolt, one of Kenya exit on Treasury tax plan. Uber and Bolt are warning of Kenya exit on Treasury tax plan. Bolt and Uber have warned they will be forced to close their operations in Kenya if Parliament approves a 6% significant economic presence tax on gross turnover of non-residents firms. You have a story on page 5 of the Business Daily this morning. And China Square leases Uchumi hyperstores. Poster sacks 29 staff over fake certificate. And loan defaults is hitting 18-year high on soaring interest. Kenyans had defaulted on more than 630 billion shillings loans in April 2024, the highest level in 18 years, as borrowers reacted to a high interest rate regime that has stifled the ability of millions to make timely repayments. Data released by the Central Bank of Kenya on Wednesday showed that the gross non-performance loans as ratio of total advance loans soared to 16.1% by April. You can follow the story on page 2 of the Business Daily this morning. This is how it looks. We'll cross over now to Uganda, where this is what Ugandans are waking up to. This is a state of the nation, Mr. President. Audit of the past year, as President Museveni steps up to the rostrum to deliver his State of the Nation address today. The ever-expanding debt burden, corruption, unemployment, and high cost of living overshadow the efforts put in sectors like energy and roads. Special coverage of this on page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10 is where you can get all the gritty details. Of course, also he promised that he will be talking about corruption during the Matters Day, right? So you can be peeling off your eyes today. Keep your eyes peeled, not peeling off, so that you can actually be following what is happening. Also, NERA extends debt for renewal of national IDs. Again, that is inside the publication today. Also, address must speak to reality and work for all. This is what the editors are saying here. President Museveni in power now for 38 years. For the 38th year, will this afternoon ascend the rostrum to deliver State of the Nation address? Why? 38 years is such a long time, Patrick Obath. Being a president, I was going to 40th year.
There are people who are born who have never known any other president. That is a strange situation to be in. Yeah, when you're here, you're 40, you know, your kids are grown up and everything else, yes. And all you know is one president.
Yeah.
I wouldn't like to live in that kind of situation myself.
From one generation to the other, right? Okay, let's see what is happening in Tanzania. Revealed East Africa's most profitable banks also is on the front page of the Citizen this morning. Tanzania and Kenya are the big winners as East Africa's banking industry continues to record impressive performance figures, with the latest results for the first quarter of 2024 pointing to a record year. And here are the faces. Maybe I can just zoom in to see how they're performing in East Africa. KCB Group CEO Paul Ruto, profit $122.59 million, followed by Equity Group CEO James Mwangi, profit $117.48 million. In Tanzania, we have NMB Bank CEO Ruth Zaipuna, $61.69 million. And we have Cooperative Bank Group CEO, this is Gideon Muriuki, $50.99 that is dollars, and $49.05 million. This is CRDB Group CEO Abdul Majid Nsekela. That is the profits there. Wow, this is such a wide margin from KCB Equity and the rest of the banks, right?
Yeah.
Professor Dominic Mwenja, your input? Now that you're for the banking sector, you can tell us. These supernormal profits, or at these supernormal profits, what is the threshold?
It's quite a bit. You can see the difference between KCB, Equity, and
the rest of the banks, yes.
You also look at regional reach that some of these banks have. With the entry into DRC between the two countries also has added a lot, quite a bit. The only country they have not been able to crack is Ethiopia, which is a huge market, but a very controlled environment. But that tells you about the importance of crossing the borders to actually expand operations and improve profitability as well. Yeah.
Right. Dr. Jim Afi, good morning. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, Dewan.
Welcome.
You know, it's just interesting that I have a student who's actually doing a study on multinationals. And I asked this lady, do we have any multinationals in Kenya? No. Equity, is Equity Bank, Equity Group, is it a multinational? No. I said, no. I then said, well, look, Equity has a subsidiary in Tanzania, another one in Rwanda, another one in Uganda, another one in the DRC, and I think they also have one in South Sudan. Mm-hmm. So a multinational is an entity which operates in a number of companies like that. Is it a multinational? No. And this is a master's student.
He's a master's student.
But, we don't think in Kenya. Ni kweli uongo? Professor Our thinking is totally superficial. It's totally superficial. Because, we were at a seminar yesterday. Did you learn anything in that seminar? I spoke to some of the people afterwards. How was the seminar? Wow, it was fantastic. I thought, wow, and I was in another meeting later in the afternoon from 5 to 6:30, and there was a fellow, Reza Ali, and this man made point after point after point. I said, Reza, thank you for your presentation, because compared to one that I had attended, run by the World Bank in the morning, the World Bank was hot air. You are hitting points after point after point. And, I tend to feel that, well, I don't know about you, Professor Weinand, but, I couldn't understand. You talk to people and they say, well, fantastic. What was fantastic about it?
It could have been done better.
This man was sleeping.
Yeah. You can tell us. Did you learn anything, Professor Kituro Wanaina?
No, it could have been done better.
It will have been done better.
It could have been done better. I think you take it.
So you didn't learn anything?
I'm not
so
quite
you
sure.
slept because it was not...
I'm joking. Actually,
yeah, I know.
You look from I think the government side was a bit, it could have packaged itself a bit better. The guy presenting the PS, Dr. Aban Mwenda, probably could have put in a different way. And I think there are key points which were coming, right?
What meeting was this? Was this the Vision
The
2030
Kenya Economic Update.
Update.
The 29th.
Yes.
Happen every quarter. And the whole thing was about trade. And that didn't come out very clearly. Because what does it mean for you to do trade? You export more. For you to export, you must enhance production. So it was not very clear what was coming and tying up with what is affecting our production. And this guy, Anthony, from Kenya Association of Manufacturers, brought very strongly, Vietnam are doing this much. We, in terms of export, we used to be like 20, but now we are like 12. But there was a very interesting point he didn't bring out clear. What is it Vietnam did, which we need to do? And no wonder when you see a company like Uber, and it's worrying, the kind of Kenyans they have been engaged, and saying we are just leaving because of the taxation. It becomes an disincentive for you to be in this country. So, but come back to the Kenya economic update. We will start with the pioneer of that. The pioneer was this lady who used to be in CRA, Kirangai, sorry. And there she was, and she could, there are gaps here. I suppose the ones coming up, they need to be packaged so that they can bring something more concrete in it. And I was sharing later on with the Mobi Kibaki Obiro, telling her, you need to come very strongly and tell the government, these are the areas perhaps we need to look at. And that didn't come out very well. But he asked a question. When he was asking a question, I left. Yeah?
Yeah, well, in fact...
It's not on contempt of your question, but I gave it at 11.
No, the worst thing was actually that, the discussions were right at the end. And by that stage, a lot of the people had left. And you see, the thing that I have against the World Bank, okay, is that they feel that, what they've got to do is to determine policy. Everything is policy. But you see, the point here, okay, is Cadbury used to operate in Kenya. They've left. Procter & Gamble used to operate in Kenya. They've left. GlaxoSmithKline used to operate in Kenya. They've left. Now, the point, exactly. Yeah. So the point here really is we've got to ask ourselves, why is it that these companies, they come here, Kenya from the point of view of people outside, wow, this is a country where we've got to invest, and even Biden, okay, well, we've got to sell more chickens to Kenya because, we got a surplus of chicken in the US. We better sell you some chicken and some eggs and, Now, the position here, okay, is that we've got to get to grips with the operational details. And, the point that I made at this particular meeting was that Unilever were going to put a factory in Mombasa to have Lipton tea manufactured there. But you see, the problem is that you start talking about this, you have problems with the county, the governor, NEMA, KRA, and the situation is that factory was never put up. It's operating. I know this from a past student who's working in Unilever. That factory is now operating in Dubai. So, and then we have political interference in Kenya. There used to be, Mombasa was the only tea auction in the whole of East Africa, the whole of the East African coast. 4 years ago, the minister said, there are cartels. One of the magic words that we use in Kenya is cartel. The explanation for anything going wrong is the cartel, okay? And the position here is that, he stopped the auction. Now, 11 countries put their tea through the Mombasa tea auction. So now, if you stop the auction, you're affecting Uganda, you're affecting Tanzania, you're affecting Rwanda. So last October, a new tea auction is now established in Dar es Salaam. And I spoke to a Dr. Mayinda, who knows people very high up in all the governments in East Africa. There was a delegation from Dar which went to Uganda, to Rwanda, to Malawi, to DRC, persuading them, look, forget about Mombasa, put your stuff through Dar es Salaam. So all the time, because we have this political interference, we are losing out as a country. And to tell you the truth, I am fearful. I know Professor Wainaina thinks I'm a very, person who's always giving the negative side of things. But I fear for the future of Kenya. And
right, you were talking about the tea, that we can see there was really a slow uptick on the auction in Mombasa.
Yes.
Because of all the glut that is there?
Yeah. Well, you see, the problem here is that in the law, in the regulations, tea cannot be sold for less than $2.30 from KTDA. Now, the price goes down. There are 3 warehouses full of tea in Mombasa, okay? Now, when the law is you take it back from the auction, now the problem is that the shelf life there is 2 years.
Very short.
So it means that if you don't sell that tea within 2 years, you have majani tea, grass, not majani tea. So the problem is, now these politicians, they know nothing, and yet they want to get into our economy and mess us up. And, Marshall's used to be a fantastic company. I remember taking students down to see their computer system, and it was so well run. Political interference, Marshall's does not exist. It was a company quoted on the NSE. I used to audit hotels. They no longer exist. Politicians took them over, left, right, and center. So, you see, we have to be very much more demanding. We listen to politicians, and let's face it, we have the grand orator of the world here. He will go to the AU and spout forth. He will go to Washington, D.C., and the President of the United States will get him to sit in the seat of the President of the United States. Why? Because, wow, this man, you know, it's like the politicians, judge a person not from what he says, but from what he does.
Right. I know you're talking about Vietnam. And I think the simple thing about Vietnam is that they started producing. And producing well. They targeted a market, which is a very large market, which is China, next door. And if you look at Vietnam, cheap labor, large investments, and mainly in agriculture, not in anything fantastic. And they fed China, or provided part of feeding China. And because of the ability to work as a result of that,
that's a word.
Ability
to work.
Ability to work.
Yeah.
Other organizations then went to invest in Vietnam because they were willing to work. Cost was actually controlled. The country isn't expensive. And so you find all these clothing producers, chip producers, you name it, the works, have set up in Vietnam, right? So they moved from China, in fact, to Vietnam.
Correct.
Right? Because China saw this opportunity. So all the countries or companies that used to go to China because of cheap labor went across the border to Vietnam. Simple. I mean, it's very simple. So Kenya, as a country, where is our target market? We're shooting everywhere. Right? We are shooting everywhere. And if you try and shoot everywhere, right, without having a product that you're trying to sell in large quantities everywhere. And that is why things like the tea auction. Tea auction was a focus where people from around the world could come and buy tea.
Right.
Right? So you brought the market into the country. The country didn't go out into the market. It's a slightly different way of doing it. If we got Kenya to start producing and growing for export, and there is a blueprint that the government, I think in 2016 or 17, produced, which is a blueprint that says we need to produce for export, not for internal consumption. So if you're looking at maize production, you're looking at maize production to feed Ethiopia or a country like that. And if you look at the global figures of trade in commodities, there is still a large opportunity. And if Kenya just takes, within the agricultural produce area, a lot of commodities, if Kenya just takes 2% of that global commodity trade, a lot of our issues in terms of generating money within Kenya will disappear. We are not thinking that way.
Yeah. Right. I want to just also to go dogly follow because you're straight from Malaysia. You can give us guys, can you see Patrick Obat's new shirt? This is, we're talking about buy Kenya, build Kenya.
I was wondering why the button is
looking really dapper this morning. Yeah, Patrick, you can tell us also in comparison.
Yeah, this morning or what?
Yeah?
No. I came back on Monday.
In comparison, yes.
No, I always make it a point of buying the national costume or something of the country where I visit.
Right.
So over and above this, I've also got what they call, they've got Baju Milayo, which is that, there's like a small hat and this and whatever. I've got that full outfit. I always buy the business outfit and the traditional outfit from the country where I visit.
Yeah, you should have done that today, so that at least we get a test and a feel of how.
I'll do that. I've got every country I've visited, I've got their national costume.
Interesting.
But I spent about slightly over 10 days in Malaysia and Singapore, two countries that were similar to Kenya in 1963. And I think the only word I would like to put out about the big difference between us and those countries is one word: discipline. That's it, discipline. And if you have discipline in everything you do, things will happen.
Absolutely.
That's it. Else. I mean, we've got policies, we've got great things that we've talked about in Kenya, and the discipline to actually implement, right, is not there. And even just the discipline amongst us as Kenyans is not there. And the simplest place to look at it is on the roads, right? The policemen, the way they operate on the roads, ourselves as drivers, the public as whatever, all that. You go to Malaysia, you go to Singapore, you don't see the chaos that we have in this country in the public space. People, when they're walking on the road, they walk on the same side as the vehicles drive. So even on the pavement, you've got that discipline, that order that sits there. Now, if people have got that kind of order and you sort of then bring an activity for them to do, they will do it diligently. They'll do it properly.
Actually, that's
So for me, that is the
there's
simple
a course
thing.
I'm doing.
Right. Let me
And
just.
that's my next. Actually, one student is called Kampaniwara from India, challenged me. And I took Malaysia and Kenya. And I've looked them from 1960s up to today. And we were debating with them, students, and like, why did we lose it? Is that, and I like the point he even talked about Vietnam. The ability, the desire, the anger, you feel nice when you're working. Hiyo culture iko kwa ndani yako. And that discipline. That's it. And that discipline comes from the leadership.
Absolutely.
If that leadership not disciplined itself, forget it.
So they had our strategy, you know.
Yeah.
They had all our documents,
Yeah.
and I can see there Peter Baraka saying, you know, strategy is a commodity, but execution is
That
an
is the
art.
It's an art.
This is where we failed completely. We have all these beautiful documents,
Yeah.
but when it comes to implementing them, it's a different kettle of fish altogether.
We can't.
Professor.
Yeah, we're horrible about doing that. Vietnam.
Right.
I spent a better part of from 2006 to 2012 in Vietnam.
Wow.
And I'm part of a high-level U.S. Academic team that was working with the Vietnamese government on various things. Vietnam is where it is today because of two things: long-term thinking, discipline, and focus. When Samsung moved their biggest factory in the world to Vietnam, to a city called Bac Ninh, I was right in the middle of the planning of moving of that factory. And what happened, the Vietnamese government, they came to me, before I even go there, the industrial policy of Vietnam is deliberate and long-term, which we don't have in this country. If you go to the industrial parks that the Vietnamese have built, you will feel ashamed at what we are doing in a lot of these other countries, especially our country. They build an entire infrastructure. They have the buildings, they have water, they have electricity, they have everything that you need. The only thing that you need to bring as somebody who is trying to start production is your equipment and your people.
Yep.
Everything else is provided for. It becomes an easier decision for you to go and make your investment. In Bac Ninh, one of the things they came to me, the part of government that was involved in the movement, there's the Minister of Construction, Vigorous Era Corporation is the one that builds the industrial parks for the Ministry of Construction. When they came to me, they said, "So, Professor, we need to figure out how we are going to add value to these guys who are coming," before they even came. And I remember very well, they're having a cup of tea, and on a piece of napkin, I designed a college for them. And that college became a reality a year later, and we went there to open. They started training 2 years before Samsung got there. And that's a deliberate effort that is focused on the need for that specific industry. And therefore, for Samsung, it was an easier decision to make. What we don't have is that focus and that oneness of purpose. And going back to when I went to Vietnam, GDP was around 100 billion. Today, it's 469 billion. That's how many? It's fourfold.
More than four.
More than four over the last 15, 16 years. That tells you if we are determined in this country and on this continent to be as deliberate as possible and focus on things that matter. Forget about politics. But then going back to the politics is the generational psyche. That's why leadership, like Professor Wainaina is saying, is very, very important.
Right.
The generational psyche that are guided by the politics of the day. If you look into this country today, the most creative generation in this country, as we are now, is the generation of 2000 to 2010, that generation. These kids who are bringing all these IT ideas and everything else that we are doing, this creative generation, those are the kids who grew up during Kibaki's time. And they grew up during Kibaki's time knowing if you are creative, if you find a space and you exploit that space and you work hard, you will succeed. Our generation, we grew up during Moi's time. And most of us grew up. And I was born during Kenyatta's time, and we knew if you work hard, you will succeed. Come Moi, where the issue of hustle, you don't have to work hard, you just have to know somebody, you just have to figure out how to grease yourself to get things done. We lost that generation absolutely for about 20, 24 years. So the generational psyche of every country is guided by the political leadership and the atmosphere that is within the country. And that's why we lose our people. For the almost 20 years that I was in Vietnam and being around Vietnam, we saw government after government focusing squarely on the development of its people, on development of, first of all, agriculture. You are right. It was from 2000. If you look at Vietnam from 1980, after Ronald Reagan slapped sanctions on Vietnam, it dropped almost to 7 billion GDP per year. And that's when the rationing they were rationing food, lines were everywhere. Then come 1994, when Bill Clinton normalized relations in Vietnam, and you see the rise from 14 billion to 24 billion to 80 billion to 100 billion, now it's 480 billion. Because there are determined people, and the national leadership guides the economy very, very carefully and anchors the economy within specific sectors of the economy that they have advantage over everybody else. So it's just a matter of focus and being determined.
But let me ask you a number of questions. Number one, Samsung is the biggest manufacturer of smartphones in the world today, bigger than Apple, etc. Okay? Is it a Vietnamese company?
Samsung's largest factory is in a city called Bắc
Yeah,
Ninh.
but
It's a South Korean company.
Exactly, thank you.
The atmosphere...
So, in fact, rather than manufacture in South Korea...
They closed their factory in China. And they moved to Vietnam.
And go to Vietnam. Because also there are sanctions against China, and also China is upscaling. Okay, so they don't want to make these trinkets any longer. Okay, people who are making those are losing employment, in fact. Okay, now, what is the electricity generation in Vietnam? 94,000 megawatts. What is it in Kenya?
3,000. About 3,500.
3,000.
And 5 times or 8 times more expensive than it is in Vietnam.
Thank you very much. You've answered my next question. Okay? So the point is, it's the environment. Kenya Power and Lighting, you know, KenGen. There's an article in the paper today. There's a geothermal project, which, you know, Margaret, our lady there, okay, it's 1% complete after 10 years.
The Suswa.
Yeah.
The Suswa geothermal, yes.
Maybe you mentioned it, you know, but, you know, here it is. It's 1% complete after 10 years. So you've hit the nail on the head. But I think, you know, KenGen, Kenya Power, and, you know, the individual Kenyan doesn't understand, you know, we may lose the business of transporting goods to Uganda. 90% comes along our pipeline. You remember, Patrick, you gave us 51% of the income of Kenya, KPC comes from Uganda. But you see, the individual policeman who's stopping those lorries 100 times on the road doesn't realize, now wait a moment, you're actually giving trade to Tanzania rather than to Kenya. So, you know, but
you see the point I think we are making here. It's what it boils to at the end of the day. And what happened on Tuesday is a very telling at Parliament. You know, you saw the poll very clearly. And it was very clear, this is Mama Boga revolution. And you look the word, the last word was a very interesting one. To them, they are very clear, it's a revolution. That's a trend we don't want to get into. I think earlier on you alluded to the point. As yesterday was The Nation was a very interesting cartoon that you're in Russia, you are where, you're here. It's not focused. In fact, somebody was suggesting that the entourage probably could have come from the US straight to South Korea, but there was Madaraka Day.
So you had to stop by.
Exactly. It can't be exaggerated. We had to stop by.
Yeah.
Go to whatever place was, go to Bugoma, whatever it was, then proceed. But the cartoon was very interesting because you see carpet going to Russia, you see carpet going to wherever. So where are we? And that even goes now to in terms of our focus. And I thought the point you would have raised is they have Samsung, but they feed their people. South Korea. They are producing.
I know, yeah.
If you go to most of the sitting rooms today is Samsung TV.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything. It used to be Sanyo.
Absolutely.
It's them now.
That's Samsung.
And it is interesting because they also where they are because of they made a focus what they want to do.
Correct.
And it reminds me of working in government. You know, when even at the level of head of states of Africa, they also like traveling. And I couldn't understand. You're in America, you are in Europe, you are in France, you are around South Korea.
We have spent 19 billion shillings
Traveling.
on in the first 9 months of this financial year for the government.
Right.
18 billion actually. 18 billion on travel.
And you can actually roll back and see how much of that we can actually do in terms of development in this country.
Correct.
And it goes back. If we can't produce, forget it.
But I think talking about focus, pick up all these countries. Vietnam has been covered. Look at Korea. What did they do? Chaebols.
Chaebols, yes.
That's all they did. They just focused on 7 or 8
Chaebols,
companies and grew them ruthlessly.
Yep.
And that is basically
yes.
what Korea is. South Korea is. It's just 7 chaebols or 8 of them. And then other companies have followed behind that. Yeah. If you go to Malaysia went on a very simple thing. They looked at commodities that the world needed. And that is what they started producing. Rubber was their big thing. What did they go back to? Palm oil.
Palm oil.
They just, rubber disappeared, palm oil came in. Right? And then the industrialization was very structured. They looked at their own needs in the country and said, we're going to produce it ourselves. And what they did was say, fine, we are going to start localizing every single product that we need in this country. And they started with their vehicle, the Proton, at the same time as we were talking about Nyayo, the Nyayo car here in Kenya.
The young pioneer car.
Yeah, Nyayo Pioneer. They started at the same time. But they did a very simple thing. They went and got Mitsubishi and said, we'll partner with you as a company. And they then removed the brand on the front and put Proton on the front. It was a Mitsubishi, basically. And even today, the powertrain of a Proton is Mitsubishi. But everything else around it is made in Malaysia. But it took X number of years for them to start manufacturing locally, and that capacity is now exporting as well.
I hope you took a road from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore. We went by here.
No, we drove.
We rode that road, yeah?
We drove.
Beautiful.
We
After I
drove
don't know how
through the
many
whole thing.
kilometers,
Yeah.
there's an Italy place. After several, and it's a nice highway.
It's
you know?
a nice highway.
Amazing.
So when you look at successful countries which were the same as Kenya in 1963, all they've done is just focus on a particular path to growth. And that is what we have not done. If we focus on a particular path to growth, instead of having what I call them, I think it's a blunderbuss, yeah? Where you shoot and these small bullets go all over the place and kill nothing. Yeah? That's what you're just shooting a blunderbuss instead of shooting a very...
You need a shotgun approach.
You need a rifle, straight away, going into one thing instead of a blunderbuss. And I think we started off trying to do that with Vision 2030. And what happened?
It was scattered.
It's been scattered, right?
And I think this is a blunderbuss that we had Professor Gituro.
This is what I was talking about.
Yeah. The blunderbuss every which way with a pail in hand. From the African summit, now maybe the next will be Russia. It's been Korea, maybe France as well. Which way to go?
Yeah.
And you can see, also Korea is
and
scrambling for that
borrowing,
piece of Africa, as I was always putting it here. Scramble for Africa too, as it is. Now, people are questioning, just I think the week before we had the Africa Development Summit here, where, and the president pledged, was it 30 billion shillings? Was it 30 billion? How much was it?
130 billion, I think.
Yeah, 30 billion shillings, if I may remember. And here also we went with the pail in hand to ask for the same amount from
South Korea.
From South Korea. So what people are asking, what is the rhyme and reason? So here you give and then you borrow at concessional notes. I don't know. So we can talk about this, especially the borrowing that we have. There's a buyback now of the Eurobond as well that is in the offing. And still we are on a borrowing spree as a country. So you are the person who was talking about, Dr. McPhee. It's not about talk, it's action. So the talk before was, in this particular regime, there will be no more borrowing. We will actually move the needle down as far as borrowing is concerned. In comparison to what is happening, do you think it's flying in the face of that particular statement? Or there's a modicum of threshold that we've not really crossed as far as breaching even that red line is concerned?
We see, one of the problems I feel is that all the time they're thinking, how do we increase our revenue? And let's face it, it is a very important thing to do that. The Institute of Certified Public Accountants a week ago were talking about extending the tax base. And, you know, we could come back to that, okay, when we're going to talk about the budget later and so on. But I feel all the time, you know, we're just focusing on one thing. We talk, you know, for example, the Congress in the United States and the Senate in the United States, they're meant to have an oversight of government. What I realize there is it's talk. Nothing happens there. Well, what happens is that Nancy Pelosi increases her portfolio 65% last year because they actually get inside knowledge about what the government is going to do, buy shares on the New York Stock Exchange, and then, of course, the shares go up when this contract is announced. So, but you see, the problem here is, you know, when we find people spending money as if there is no tomorrow, you know, we've got to ask ourselves, now wait a moment, we've got the income side, but we've also got the expenditure side. And expenditure is just going up and up and up. Last year, we had a trade imbalance of 1,580 billion shillings in Kenya. Our imports were greater than our exports by 1,580 billion. Now, our exports actually exceeded for the first time 1 trillion shillings. But the point is, when you look, what was the main item of expenditure? Normally it's oil, but now it's machinery. And what is included in that machinery? Cars. I was with a gentleman from the Central Bank of Kenya. He's a very clever man. He's an economist. And my goodness, you know what a clever man he is. He explained to me why the shilling had gone from 160 shillings on the 12th of February down to almost 129 shillings a little bit, you know, within days. Okay, explain that. Now I can actually give you that explanation. It's very, very interesting. But you see also what happens is, you know, he's a man who actually drives a small car. And he says, you know, I'm terribly embarrassed because, you know, I go to meetings. He couldn't attend the meeting actually yesterday morning because the monetary policy meeting was taking place. Okay, yes, the Central Bank of Kenya. So he couldn't. But he's got a small car beside, you know, these other, you know. There was a lady there, a young lady studying economics in a Canadian university, and I said, "What type of car does your father drive?" V8. Kama kawaida too, you know. And I actually went to the Kenya School of Government last year. There was a big meeting for all the finance people in all the ministries and so on. You know, there were so many V8s there and Prados and all the rest of it. You know, they couldn't find parking.
So where did you park your Toyota?
Well, in fact, I had to go into the bush somewhere.
They wouldn't even let you in.
So, you know, we're looking at expenditure, you know, and Well, the point is, you know, there's a clip going around actually at the moment. I don't have my phone with me. So the position there, okay, is that when these heads of state had to travel on a bus in London, this is unacceptable, you know? This is unacceptable. And you see these motorcades going up to this conference hall in, you know, in South Vietnam, in Seoul. And of course, the guys are there with their national flags, and this is, you know. I asked a lady this morning in the lift, okay, she said, "You're looking very smart." I said, "Am I smart enough to appear in State House?" She says, "I think you are, in fact." So, you know, but this is, the big thing in Kenya is status.
Yeah.
And I was taken out for lunch, you know, about a month ago, okay? There was a man from London. His family took me out. We went to a Chinese restaurant. When we came out, there was a lady driving a Cayenne, a Porsche. Mm-hmm. This is a car that cost 14 million shillings. And she, obviously, when she goes places, you know, she, wow, this is fantastic, you see? And where do we get the money? Why the banks in Kenya are so profitable is that Kenyans get loans to buy cars and buy houses as well.
Buy houses, yeah.
So, you know, we never asked ourselves now, where does this profit come from? It comes from those people who are well off, who are outside the tax bracket very often, okay, because they're dealing in cash. And so, for us, our problem is status.
Conspicuous consumption.
All right, guys. We need to take a short break right now. It's 7 o'clock on the nose. Yeah. Status. And of course, at expense also of Kenyans. As you can see, we'll come back. When we talk about State House, maybe I'll show you this particular cartoon on the other side of the program where the government is needing some petty cash of about 1.1 billion shillings from Wanjiku's wallet, as the cartoon will put it, for their luxury. Right, so we take a short break. When we circle back, of course, we shall be slicing and dicing some of these pertinent issues as far as finance bill is concerned. Also, MPC was meeting yesterday, as Dr. McPhee has alluded to. They've maintained that particular lending rate from the central bank at 13%. And of course, also we have the Purchasing Managers Index that is also giving a good indication of what is really happening since January up to now. We shall try and also analyze that as well. You're watching Sokoni here on Morning Prime. We circle back with more. Don't go away.